Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories. Nigel Farage has promised voters massive tax cuts and big spending. He also said he wanted his Reform UK party to become the real opposition to a Labour government. At least 17 people have died and dozens are missing after 2 migrant boats capsized off Italy. And there's renewed concern that escalating tensions between Israel and Lebanon could lead to war. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with Ryan Sabey, Deputy Political Editor at The Sun, and Jessica Elgot, Deputy Political Editor at The Guardian. Welcome to both of you. So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph leads with the revelation that Boris Johnson has been drafted in by the Tories to try and offset the threat of votes being lost to reform. The former PM has apparently put his name to tens of thousands of letters being sent out to voters this week. Daily Mail features an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who claims Keir Starmer's bid to lower the voting age to 16 is designed to be electorally helpful to him by locking the Tories out for years. On the front of The Guardian, claims by economists that Reform's manifesto of tax cuts and billions in spending does not add up. Reform leader Nigel Farage is also on the front of The Eye, where he admits he doesn't know if his party's pledge to increase tax thresholds to £20,000 could ever be possible. Meanwhile, the Daily Star is getting behind candidate Count Binface. They say his 24-point plan to save Britain is the most sane and honest manifesto out there. On the front of the Financial Times, corporate bosses in France are racing to build contacts with Marine Le Pen's far right. And German police have welcomed England fans to Frankfurt, but warned troublemakers to stay away after some clashed with Serbia fans after Sunday's game. That is the lead story for The Mirror. And the Metro leading with a hero patient who stopped an alleged self-radicalised lone wolf terrorist who wanted to kill as many nurses as possible. Well, a quick reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head to Ryan and Jessica. Welcome to both of you. Should we kick off with your paper, The Guardian? Nigel Farage and his big tax, big spending plans. Tell us more.
Yes, so he insists that we don't call this a manifesto because he says that a manifesto is something that is just people see and think of as a lying factory. But there's a lot in this that doesn't add up. The IFS saying that it's implying an extra £141 billion a year of tax cuts, paid for by £156 billion of saving. Now, those are enormous numbers there on things like raising the minimum threshold for income tax, abolishing stamp duty, scrapping VAT on energy bills, getting rid of inheritance tax. There are other quite outlandish things in there, life sentences for all drug dealers. And, you know, it sort of reads a bit like a wish list that Nigel Farage kind of came up or have been thinking about for years and just was kind of thrown down on this paper. And even he isn't quite sure that any of this would be deliverable.
Which takes us to The Eye, does it not, as well? Talking about that £20,000 threshold, which he says would take pensioners out, for example. I think I said big tax, not big tax cuts, didn't I? So I'll correct myself there. Reform UK leader admits that his party's manifesto promises may not add up because, he says, it's impossible for any politicians to correctly predict the future state of public finances.
You wonder whether you just take your hat off to someone like Nigel Farage and just say, at least he's being honest. All these, politicians, election after election, make big promises, whether it's tax cuts or spending commitments they just can't keep after the election. And he just says it's impossible to know whether you can actually stick to them or not. But it's sort of frankly damning, though, on the other hand, that you've got sort of a mainstream politician just saying, look, here's a piece of paper, here's a contract, with the people, and actually, I don't know if I'm going to stick to it. So actually, what are people actually going into the voting booth and voting for if they can't trust the piece of paper they're going to be voting on?
Well, answer that. I mean, you answer it. Why would people consider voting?
I think you've just got to look at the sort of the breakdown and the lack of trust in those other parties. That people have had 14 years of Conservative rule. They want to change. You look at Labour's offering, on spending commitments. Is it really really that much different from the Conservatives. You know, 25 billion pounds or so in difference between the tax cuts and the spending commitments. And people sometimes just look at his frankness. And he's, you know, I think it's John Curtis, the election expert. He said he's one of the most influential politicians of the 21st century. People are flocking to him. He does all these events all over the country, and he's got hundreds of people, you know, to come out and see him.
I think it's super revealing that he says that he's doing this to provoke debate, which is essentially the entire reason he's entered the election, right? He's there to kind of provoke discussion, to have the things he's saying here put to other politicians and to challenge them, and that's essentially the reason for him being here.
Yeah, ditching net zero to save 30 billion a year, a patriotic curriculum in schools, lifting corporation tax threshold to 100,000. I mean, all of these, you know, one would say right-wing policies. The question is this about 2029, as he said today? This is one step towards 2029 and being the real opposition. Or is this about Nigel Farage and his future, you know, in that part of politics?
I think if he wants to get, you know, be in a position where he can challenge to be Prime Minister, as he puts it, in 2029, he has to be in the House of Commons. So whether that then becomes a reverse takeover, like we saw in Canada, of the Conservative Party, that seems to be his strategy. But he's talking about this election being that bridgehead between 2024 now and 5 years' time, where he could probably come up against Keir Starmer and, you know, be up against him at the dispatch box. That's how he sees it panning out.
So he has to win in Clacton. Even though other parties are saying they need to throw the kitchen sink to stop that happening, you know, that is, if he doesn't do that, he can't do stage two. It's
going to be very difficult. How do you really see, you know, he could get in at a by-election, but really, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. You have to be, you know, by-elections don't happen, you know, all the time, so you can't really, you know, plan around that. This is his big moment. Clacton UKIP did very well there before. It's ripe for the taking. So, and that's why you talk about throwing the kitchen sink at it. That's what Reform are going to do over the next few weeks.
In Wales, for the launch, to show what life is like under a Labour government, quoting all sorts of waiting list figures for the health service in Wales, for example. But the Daily Telegraph talking again about how it's the Tories who will most feel the Farage effect. And who do they roll in? Boris Johnson, at least in terms of leafleting.
Yes, so it doesn't look like, from reading between the lines, that we're going to see sort of big appearances of Boris Johnson on the campaign trail around all those red wall seats that he was so proudly going around in the 2019 election. But there will be letters signed by him that CCHQ are going to manage to try and, you know, hopefully that will win over more people than who are, you know, very big detractors of Boris Johnson. I think he probably turns off as many voters as he sort of brings in for the party. But it's interesting that, you know, he's kind of being deployed in this paper fashion, but he doesn't really seem to be that keen to properly enter the fray himself.
Yeah, if he really wanted to put himself front and centre, he would be on the election sort of campaign trail. I think he's on holiday. He's, you know, someone very close to him says he's on holiday for the best part of the election. It just feels like for Boris Johnson, this one could be the one to sit out, and then you just see where all the dust settles a few weeks, months after the election, and then you know, where does Nigel Farage fit into the relationship with Boris Johnson? They were, you know, seemed, you know, relatively close during that Brexit campaign, so it just makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes.
God, just hadn't thought of those two vying to be party leader, but there we are, for the future, possibly. But the point is, I suppose, that the Reform vote is spread around, you know, around constituencies, and you need, if you're a smaller party, you need to be targeted, don't you, in where you're pushing to win.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that we may see a very high Reform vote across the country, but that will mean them in percentage terms, but that will mean them coming second in an awful lot of seats. And the reality, the sort of embarrassing reality for the Conservatives is in a lot of those red wall seats that became so totemic in the 2019 election, you might see the Tories push into third place in those seats now, with Reform ahead of the Tories and Labour winning those seats back.
There's big legitimacy problems and democracy problems with that, because you can end up with the Reform Party ending up with 6-7 million votes and maybe only having one MP in the Commons. So
same as the Liberal Democrats, who probably, again, you know, might win 40 seats.
Yeah, so it does throw big problems, and throws open the question of whether you change the electoral system or what have you. So.
OK. In the meantime, I was going to ask about polling just quickly in terms of, all of this crossover point we had back end of last week, more polling tonight. What's the latest on polling in terms of what Reform's pushing?
I think Reform, in some polls, they are pushing the Conservatives very, very close. Obviously, we had that, they were 1 percentage point ahead last week. There's the poll today where I think where they're 1% behind. But I think the Reform vote has really come on in the last couple of weeks or so. I think it's up by 3 or 4%. So the Conservatives have really got them hot on the heels, and Rishi Sunak's got to turn something around very, very quickly to pull ahead from the Reform. But the way they always talk about in elections, the big momentum, and that seems to be with Reform in that. And if you're a Tory strategist, you'd be worried tonight.
Move on to the Daily... Well, and do you want to pick up on that?
Well, I was going to say, I was talking to some canvassers today, and people who were sort of doing in Labour seats, and they were saying people are now more likely to tell them if they're voting Reform. Before, people seemed a little bit reticent to say that's who they were voting for, and then more and more people are vocalising that. OK. Daily Mail then, Jessica.
Rishi, Keir only wants votes at 16 to entrench his power. The Prime Minister warning on Starmer's plans for the electoral system about young votes. But this is an interview, isn't it, that the paper's got. The PM's intervention coming in a major interview with the Daily Mail.
Yeah, this is it feels like the next stage of the strategy that the Tories have started doing over the last week, which is to say, you've got to vote for us because otherwise Labour will have too big a majority and we'll be able to do too much, in power, which is an extraordinary place for an incumbent government to be in. That they're effectively conceding defeat, sort of 2.5 weeks before polling day. And he's picked on quite a clever area, I think, because this is one of the most broadly unpopular policies that Labour have, which is votes at 16, which, broadly speaking, I think that the public is not in favour of. But Keir Starmer apparently himself feels quite strongly about and thinks that he's the one, apparently with some doubts from his shadow cabinet, who genuinely believes that votes at 16 is the right thing to do. And, of course, you can then make the argument that younger people are more likely to vote Labour, and therefore it makes it even more difficult, potentially, for the Conservatives in the next election.
In the meantime, who do we see inside the Sun? Looks like it's you,
yes.
With a woman who wants to be Chancellor.
That's right. I was...
there he is.
Down in Southampton earlier today.
You look in shock.
No, exactly. I looked horrified with Rachel Reeves, and she's got a 5-point plan to try and help save the pubs. Whether that's changing the business rate rules or making sure that there's cash points available around the country for people to actually spend their money, the right to buy so local communities can actually get in there, and if it looks like the pub is about to be boarded up, closed down, as a sort of matter of last resort, they can get in and actually buy it. So, and interestingly as well, Labour are out campaigning in Southampton Hitchin, which is a seat which is 46 on their target list, so where the Conservatives are sort of defending those seats where they've got a big majority. Labour are sort of really on the offensive in all their seats that they're going for.
Well, I've got 3 questions. 1, was that in the morning? 2, did you finish the pint? And 3, does this mean the Sun is edging towards backing Labour?
It was about midday, I think. So
what's Rachel drinking?
Yeah, there was a pint of vodka was the actual pint. But I think we've got our leaders' debate on Monday, so let's see what happens. And our readers care a lot about cost of living crisis. We'll see who comes up with the best answers. We'll wait for that on Monday. Yeah.
Professional. He avoided the question, didn't he? There. Anyway, lots more stuff to come in the next part of our programme, including: is London dragging the chain on productivity in the UK? We will discuss that story in the Financial Times next. It's the bottom one there.
Elephants do rumble, and the rumbles have got different meanings at every moment. They will understand the meaning by themselves. For example, some of the rumbles are like complimenting, or some of them are like not happy, and some of the rumbles are warning. And so the elephants will understand amongst themselves what the communication is all about. We have experienced it here in the nursery by seeing one of our orphans rumbling at a certain center, and then the other one who is a little bit farther away responding to that rumble, not the one too close. So that tells us clearly that they do have names, and they do communicate to one another through those rumbles. It will be the matriarch that will give the names because the matriarch is in charge of all the rest of the herd. And the matriarch controls and make commands to the rest of the herd. Elephants can communicate through the rumble, can communicate through the voices. They know the voice of one another. They know the voice of the people as well. They can identify different animals and different people by smell, natural scent, and not the perfumes. Regardless of the perfumes, they can really identify you by your natural scent, and they can communicate also through the same. They have bad days sometimes because when one is not in a good mood, you will realize that that elephant does not want to get close to the others, and that elephant is on his or her own. And you might realize some of those elephants, when they're in a bad mood, they want to bully everyone around. They do have different temperament, just like we human beings. Everything that is associated with people is associated with these elephants as well. Elephants stay in herds and families, and they protect one another in that family. And they'll always want to make sure that all the members of the herd are safe. And if a new stranger comes in the herd, they will not accept that new member right away. They will need to communicate to the new member and know why the new member wants to join them. And if they happen to find a young one, because they are very maternal, the females are very maternal, if they happen to find a young one, they'll always want to protect them within their families.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Joining me once again, Ryan Sabey, Deputy Political Editor of The Sun, and Jessica Elgot, Deputy Political Editor of The Guardian. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to migration again. Obviously, Nigel Farage suggesting it is an immigration election, but your paper, Ryan, suggesting that another person has been relocated to Rwanda.
That's right. My colleague Harry Cole, our political editor, has got this story. So it's the second failed asylum seeker has gone off to Rwanda under this sort of voluntary scheme. Now, with this, they actually get some money to go there. So we wave them goodbye with £3,000, and they decide to go off on their own accord. But I think one of the things about this story coming out, and it's quite timely for the government, is that they're so desperate, I think, to sort of claw back some of that poll lead that Labour have got. They just want to be talking about immigration. So I think this story will be helpful to them in the respect that they just want to throw the focus on that. And there's also that flight that's set to go off to Rwanda at the end of July. You just wonder whether, what state will the Tory party be in at the end of July? But it's one of those sort of political traps where Keir Starmer is going to counsel the Rwanda scheme, and the Tories can point to him after the election and say, look what he does, he's soft on migration, but that's a long way down the track.
And, I mean, I know you followed the Prime Minister, I think it was last week, was it?
That's right.
The sense that possibly July was the wrong time to call this election. You had that sense from him. Do you think it's partly because it's a few weeks away from the first flight? Theoretically going to Rwanda?
I think the reason for calling the election was it seemed like it was the best worst time, as it were. I think if you waited a little bit later on, the economy may not have picked up in the same way that they was hoping. But with the migration flight, you do wonder whether he just didn't want to get to that date, because ultimately there could well have been legal challenges and no flights would have got off the ground.
Yeah, I mean, at least in this case, he can say, well, we would have got them off and we will after the election. But of course, if he'd have called the election in November, we might have been talking about how they still hadn't got Rwanda flights up, the economy was still doing worse. And I think one of the other calculations he had, which hasn't paid off, is that Nigel Farage perhaps wouldn't enter the fray if it was a snap election, that he would have more time to prepare if it was in the autumn, and that's something that clearly hasn't paid off.
Unless he was in America in the
Unless
autumn,
he was in
of course,
America,
which is the other
unless,
calculation,
of course,
isn't
yeah.
it? Jessica, talk us through the Financial Times, which is the drag that London is proving on the economy, and explain why, if you can.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting, this story, because often we talk about how other parts of the country are perhaps a drag on London, that it's London that's kind of has the hot, this financial centre, it's the tourism centre, and it's the place that kind of fuels the British economy. Well, this is saying that London was actually the main drag to UK productivity growth between 2019 and 2022. So essentially that means that there's less of a gap between London and the rest of the country now. Maybe we could even describe it as levelling up, but it's actually levelling down. And one of the reasons for that is that London contracted a lot more than other parts of the country during the pandemic, when, you'll remember, lots of the things that London's famous for it couldn't do. There was, no international tourism coming into the city. People come to the theatre, going to sort of restaurants, spending lots of money on shopping, retail, hospitality. All of that had to kind of suddenly stop, and the capital is still recovering from that.
This whole thing is going to be a big problem for whichever government comes in. Growth is that both parties have put the Conservatives and Labour put this at the heart of their manifesto. And also, you've got so many people who are economically inactive. You've got the best part of 9 million people who are out of work. I think you've got 2.4 million who are long-term sick. So getting all these people back in is a big challenge. But if you can get some of them doing some work, it can help boost productivity, but it's a big problem across the whole country.
Now, the man who missed England's first game can throw ahead to the next one, which I don't know if you've got time to watch or not. It'd be a busy election schedule. It's in the Mirror.
Yes, no, this is this is the England's big game. It's Thursday night against Denmark, and the German cops are saying to the England fans, let's try and stop the singing of the really bad songs and just try and have a good time. There were fights at the, I think it was limited. And with all these cases, it's always just a very small percentage, but it gets beamed across the world and, on TV screens and in the newspapers. So actually, the mindless few don't even bother going. And you just wonder why these people who are, the mindless few, aren't they subject to the banning orders? Or, well, they soon will be if they get caught. Well,
one person apprehended at Manchester Airport on returning. We've heard this evening UEFA clamping down on Serbia as well, the Serbia Football Association. So, the eyes are on there, aren't they? Anything to...
people have spent a fortune to go out there. It seems extraordinary to me that people would spend a fortune just to go there and have a fight and get arrested. And there are so many, I've got plenty of friends and family who are heading out there, and I think, so many people just want to go and have a good time.
Jessica, Ryan, thank you both very much indeed. See you for more, obviously, in the 11. Right now, here's the weather. Well, Tuesday will be another fairly unsettled day, but the weather should then calm down as an area of high pressure nudges towards us. First thing on Tuesday, most places should be dry and bright. Any patches of mist in the south should clear fairly readily. Northern Scotland, though, a little different, cloudy, some patchy rain at times. During the morning, we'll see some cloud and rain graze the southeast corner of England, and this will bring some heavy outbreaks for a time. Elsewhere, a mix of sunshine and showers, with most of the showers affecting the northern half of the UK. Well, still to come in Sky News at 11, our press preview continues. Reform UK's Nigel Farage pledging to cut taxes and spend big.